Hello everyone, Just Podcast TV is here. Please don't forget to like and subscribe and hit the bell icon to get notified on new contents.
Episode 30. A Shred of Warmth. Are there any rooms available on the third floor? James walked straight to the reception on the first floor and politely addressed the waitress. The waitress looked up and was surprised to see James bringing so many people in. Then she smiled awkwardly and said, "Sorry, sir, there are too many people with you. I'm afraid it's not appropriate for you to sit on the third floor." James frowned when he saw the waitress beat around the bush instead of answering his question. He felt that she did not respect him. Just as he was about to lose his temper, the general manager, Richard Smith, walked over. Richard looked at the waitress and signaled to her to remain quiet. He then walked over to James and said respectfully, "Sir, you want to dine on the third floor? That's not a problem. Please wait a moment. I'll see to it right away." He then turned around and ordered the waitress, "Hurry up and clean the biggest room for me. Arrange a room with enough seats for this gentleman's guests. Hurry up and go." "Mr. Smith." The waitress looked a bit confused. Although it was an order from the general manager, the third floor was almost fully booked. She really did not know how to accommodate so many more guests. In addition, the third floor was the highest level of their restaurant. Usually only a small number of distinguished guests dined on the third floor. This was the first time she had seen so many people dine on the third floor at the same time. "Hurry up. I don't care what method you use, just arrange everything for me. Otherwise, you won't have to come to work tomorrow." Richard could not care much at the moment. The person in front of him was an important guest. Miss had instructed him to take special care of him. He did not dare to show the slightest bit of neglect. Otherwise, the consequences would be too dire. Once the waitress saw Richard getting so angry, she did not dare to say anything more. She hurriedly ran to the third floor to make arrangements without hesitation. James was satisfied when he saw Richard being so cooperative. He looked at Richard and asked politely, "May I know who you are?" "I am Richard, the general manager of the Chef's Grill restaurant. Sir, this way, please." After Richard introduced himself, he extended his hand in an inviting gesture. Then he walked to James's side and personally led the way for him. Richard knew that he should not judge James by his appearance. Despite his cheap clothes, he was indeed an important guest here. In fact, his wealth had already surpassed many celebrities in New York City. James's noble identity, aura, and temperament were further emphasized by Richard's respectful attitude. His former colleagues' eyes were filled with envy, jealousy, and blessing. With Richard's personal arrangements, everything went without any hiccups. James had to admit that the waitress at the front desk was quite efficient. By the time James and his group entered the third floor, she had already prepared the room and was waiting for them at the elevator, greeting them respectfully. From the conversations of the passing guests, James learned that to arrange the largest room for them, Richard had waived all the expenses of the guests who were dining in the largest room. They had done this to get the other party to change rooms. James knew where the largest room was located as he had dinner with Vanessa in that room last night. He did not say much and just glanced at Richard with a smile on the corner of his lips as he headed straight to the room. Still, he remembered Richard's good deeds in his heart. "Come, let's toast to a better tomorrow." In the private room, James raised his glass and faced everyone. "Yeah." They all raised their cups and took a big gulp. Next, everyone began chatting and losing themselves in the jovial atmosphere. The atmosphere of the party was jovial and lively, and everyone drank to their heart's content. However, the lively atmosphere in their room was a little out of place with other guests on the third floor. James did not care, though. As long as everyone was happy and had a fun time, he would do what he felt comfortable about. He did not need to follow too many secular rules. He ate steak as if it were flatbread and drank red wine like beer. Everyone savored this luxurious dinner that they had never enjoyed in their lives. However, James's private room was just too lively and a bit too noisy, making the guests in the other private rooms unhappy. Some guests even complained about them to the manager, expressing their dissatisfaction. Richard used his own methods to resolve them one by one. In fact, Richard didn't really like James and his group either. To be more precise, he didn't like their rowdiness in a somber place like this. He thought they might have come to the wrong place. However, there was nothing he could do about it. The young lady had told him to take good care of them. Unless he did not want his job anymore, he did not dare to neglect them. Moreover, he was very clear about the 10 real estate certificates that James brought out last night. He did not want to end up like Manager William. Guys, do you know what kind of wine this is? After drinking a lot of wine and eating their fill, Scott stood up and turned to everyone while shaking the glass in his hand. I don't know. We can't tell what kind of wine this is, but its taste is not bad. I just don't have the right word to describe how it tastes, someone replied. Other colleagues all shared the same opinion. Haha, of course it tastes good. I just peeked at the label. Guess what? We're drinking the 1988 Harlan Estate tonight. Scott looked at everyone and laughed. Wow. His colleagues were all stunned. Heavens. This was the 1988 Harlan Estate. It was so expensive. The price of a bottle like this was estimated to be at least $1,000. They all looked at the pile of empty bottles in the corner of the room at the same time. They were shocked. There were at least 30 bottles there. In other words, James had spent $30,000 on the wine alone. They were stunned by the revelation. The wine was supposed to be savored slowly, but today they did not really taste the wine at all. They drank the expensive Harlan Estate like they were drinking cheap beer. Most importantly, it was the Harlan Estate from 1988. Each bottle was worth more than $1,000. Scott's words made the atmosphere a little dull. Maybe Scott was a little drunk at the moment. When he saw everyone's worried expressions, he immediately said, "Don't worry, everyone. My friend James is rich now. His wealth is beyond your imagination. Everyone just feel free to drink as much as you can." After he finished speaking, he raised his head and gulped down the entire glass. His unrestrained actions caused everyone to burst into laughter. He was not drinking red wine. His arrogant and bold demeanor suggested that he was drinking white wine. The party was a blast, and his colleagues were all very happy. Finally, it was time to pay the bill that they were most concerned about. "Waiter, give me the bill." James shouted at the waiter standing at the door. Although his colleagues were a little tipsy, they all perked up their ears. They really wanted to know how much James had spent on this dinner tonight. "Hello, sir. Mr. Smith had personally instructed that all of your expenses in this room are on the restaurant tonight." The waiter walked over and said to James with a smile, "Oh my God, a free meal?" Everyone was shocked, staring at the waiter in surprise. They all doubted their hearing, wondering if they had misheard his words. Roughly, they estimated that they must have spent at least thousands of dollars on tonight's meal. Yet the manager actually gave them a free pass. This was too exaggerated. "Yes, Mr. Smith has personally told us to waive all of your expenses tonight." When the waiter saw James's questioning look, he immediately repeated himself. This time everyone heard it clearly. "Got it." James nodded at the waiter. He was surprised at first, but then he revealed a smile. He said happily, "I should have known she was the one who arranged it all. This girl really knows how to repay kindness." Firstly, Richard welcomed him personally. Then he arranged a room for him at great costs, and now he even gave him a waiver. This series of actions made James instantly think of a person, Vanessa. He didn't need to think about anything else. He was sure that this girl had instructed Richard beforehand. Otherwise, he, as the general manager, wouldn't have had such courage. Moreover, he was not James's friend or anything. He didn't have any reason to help him. Thinking about all of this, James somehow felt a shred of warmth. Episode 31. Free Ride. When James and his group reached the first floor, Richard Jenkins approached. "Sir, may I have a word?" The men walked to the front desk. Jenkins said, "Sir, you are a valued guest here. We would like to extend a VIP membership card to you." James was not expecting this, but he managed to respond politely despite being fairly drunk. "Mr. Jenkins, the magnificent free meal tonight is already enough. You don't need to give me VIP membership." Although he knew that Jenkins had done all of this at Vanessa's behest, James still had to be courteous. "We'd be honored if you'd accept our VIP membership," the manager responded. "It's a small token of appreciation to you from our restaurant." Who was he kidding with the false modesty, Jenkins wondered. The guy owned 10 whole floors of a blue-chip building in Midtown Manhattan. Composed as ever on the outside, Jenkins was starting to get worried. What if Tucker didn't accept the membership card? After all, Miss Arison, the restaurant owner's daughter, had asked Jenkins specifically to offer it as a gift. And VIP status at the Atlantic Grill wasn't something to be easily dismissed. Many people of means in New York were unable to get a coveted VIP card from the restaurant. Now he actually had to ask James Tucker to accept it. The whole thing felt strange to Jenkins. James was honestly reluctant at first, but he gave in. "All right then, I'd be happy to accept your generous offer." "Wonderful," Jenkins replied. "I will just need your phone number and we will take care of all the details." Now it was James who found things a little strange. If they wanted to give him a VIP card, they could just give it to him. There was no need to get his phone number. But in the glow of such a spectacular evening, he just went with the flow. After he gave his number, the receptionist handed him a VIP card. Jenkins then escorted him out of the restaurant. James's friends absorbed the whole scene. First, the restaurant didn't charge him for an enormously expensive meal, and then it gave him an exclusive VIP card. To top it off, the general manager personally walked him to the door as if they were old school chums. They were playing it cool, but inside they were astonished. James basked in the attention. He graciously said goodbye to his old colleagues one by one and sent them on their way. He then walked to his car, enjoying the familiar bustle and hum of New York City at night. When James reached his car, he knew right away he was in no condition to drive. "Looks like it's going to be either Uber or a cab tonight," he thought. James sat on the hood of his car, enjoying the lingering effects of his buzz. He wanted to chill out a little bit before finding a ride home. Tonight, he would be returning to his new home, a luxury condominium in the Murray Building in Ritzy, Tribeca. Thinking of his soft leather sofa, he immediately felt a little weary. "Hey, you drunken asshole! You're screwing up my live broadcast!" Snapped alert from his hazy thoughts, James turned his head and saw a lovely woman in heavy makeup and sexy clothes, pointing a phone at his car. "Look, I found a Ferrari 812 parked on the street. There are a lot of swanky cars in New York, but I actually ran into a rare luxury model. You guys are very lucky tonight. Let's take a closer look at this sweet car and broaden your horizons a little." The woman was talking non-stop into the phone in her hand. Clearly, she was live streaming a show to her online viewers. James recognized her. She was the host of a live broadcast on a social media app. He'd stumbled upon it once while mindlessly flipping through online videos, and now he remembered her face. Her username was Sexy Moon. James wasn't sure what that meant, but he wasn't sure what most usernames meant. Must be an inside joke, he figured. Curious, he pulled out his phone and pulled up her account. Although she was firing off words like a machine gun, he saw that there were less than 50 people watching her broadcast at the moment. It was obvious she was a newbie on the platform who'd yet to build up a sizable audience. "Hey, asshole, didn't you hear what I said? Get out of my shot. I need this car for my show." When James didn't budge, Sexy Moon got even more angry. Obviously, she did not think that this car belonged to the man in front of her. He was wearing shabby clothes and was drunk to boot. There was no way such an expensive car could be his. James looked at her curiously as if she were a joke. This pissed her off even more, and her voice rose an octave. "Didn't you hear what I said? Move it!" James was beginning to find her behavior amusing. He had never encountered someone so blindingly presumptuous in his life. It was as if she owned the Ferrari. He just kept smiling at her, saying nothing. Sexy Moon was undeterred. It was rare for her to encounter such a luxury sports car on the streets of New York, so she wasn't willing to miss this opportunity. Thinking for a moment, she changed her approach and tried to persuade James to do her bidding. "You don't have to be stubborn, dude. I'm doing this for your own good." "What do you mean?" James asked. He raised his brows, curious why she had changed her tactics. Seeing that James finally spoke, Sexy Moon was delighted. She stared at him and said seriously, "Do you know how much this car is worth?" Before he could respond, she kept rattling on. "Let me tell you, 5.3 million. If you damage it, could you pay for it? I don't think so. Now stop being a stupid drunk and move away from the car before you get in over your head, before you even know you're in the pool." James laughed out loud at this brash New Yorker. Despite all the abuse, it was one of the things he loved about the city. All the characters you could encounter. He looked at her and said, "Then I should really thank you." He stood up and began to walk away from the Ferrari. Once he was out of her viewfinder, Sexy Moon made a yes gesture into her camera lens. But as she moved in closer to the car to get a good shot for her audience, she froze. Because at that moment, the Ferrari 812's headlights suddenly lit up like the eyes of a slumbering beast. The key was in James's hand. Looking at James, who was smiling like the victorious smartass he was, Sexy Moon instantly felt her face turn red. She never in a million years would have imagined that this drunk wearing cheap clothes was actually the owner of this car. She was incredibly embarrassed. She wanted to slink away and go find a hole to hide in. Even the live broadcast room was in an uproar. The audience sent countless awkward emojis in the comment section. Sexy Moon just stood there in a daze, unsure what to do next. James smiled and finally broke the awkwardness with a question. "Do you know how to drive?" "Yes, I know how to drive," she shot back. "As you've clearly noticed," he said, "I'm drunk, so I can't drive. I need a driver. If you bring me home, I'll let you do a live broadcast in my car." Before she could respond, he climbed into the passenger side and reclined the seat, as if he were in a lazy boy chair in the paneled basement of a tract house on Long Island, rather than a $5 million sports car on the streets of Manhattan. He was sure she would take him up on his offer. It would almost certainly bring a lot of attention to her live broadcast room. James, on the other hand, just wanted to find a safe ride home. Sexy Moon practically had no choice in the matter. After recovering from her shock, she sat in the driver's seat. Fixing her phone at an appropriate angle, she started the Ferrari and the live broadcast at the same time. It didn't take long. Once the car was heading south on Fifth Avenue, the number of eyes on her broadcast began to increase. It quickly exceeded 1,000, and it kept going the farther they drove. The comment section was on fire. They loved this amazing turn of events. James gazed into his phone from the passenger seat. It was a strange sensation watching a live broadcast while simultaneously participating in it, but ultimately he could care less. He only cared whether this social media influencer he'd randomly run into would be able to get him back to Tribeca safely. He did not want her to smash up his $5 million car. As they approached the Murray building, James signaled Sexy Moon to pull over. He had sobered up enough to drive the rest of the way himself. The most important thing was that he did not want this stranger to know his exact address. He hadn't completely lost all of his safety awareness. Once Sexy Moon was on the sidewalk, James yelled out a chipper "thanks" through the open passenger side window and drove away. Episode 32. The Reunion. After Sexy Moon got out of the Ferrari, the strange drunken guy climbed into the driver's seat, thanked her, then slowly drove away. She was rooted to the spot, stunned. She could not figure this guy out. He lived in one of the most desirable districts in the city. He drove a luxury Italian sports car. Yet he was wearing a set of clothes that couldn't have cost more than $50, 100 tops. She didn't know if he was pretending to be low profile or simply was so arrogant that he didn't care what he wore. In Unit 44A of the Murray building, James lay on a plush sofa, the entire living room brightly lit. Taking in the luxurious appointments around him, he felt as if he were in a dream. The decor and furnishings were all over-the-top name brands, a 21st century version of a modern palace. Nonetheless, the condo was too big for a single person, and it was too quiet. "No, I have to add some liveliness to this place," he muttered to himself. Ever since he was young, James had a wish. When he grew up and became successful, he wanted to bring his parents to the big city to enjoy a lavish life alongside him. Only a few years ago, when he was still busting his ass making a living, he couldn't live anywhere close to Manhattan, commuting in by train from the suburbs. Later, he was only able to afford his dingy rented apartment in a sketchy part of the city. But now, he knew the time was right. Now that he owned such an expensive property, it was the perfect opportunity to bring his parents to the city to enjoy a life of leisure they so much deserved after all of their hard work. At the same time, their presence would add some much-needed life to this enormous living space. While he was lost in his thoughts, he heard a ping on his phone and glanced at the screen. In the college alumni chat group that hadn't been active for a long time, former class president Lee Taylor had sent a message. "Wexford College, class of 2018. Our next reunion in New York will be held in 3 days. I hope we will see you all there." Suddenly and surprisingly, the chat group sprung to life. Heather Cassidy, the class vice president, responded immediately, writing, "I'll be there." Next, his old classmate Mary Baldino also replied, "Me too." Following that, another classmate, Bill Novak, replied, "Participate +1." Jendai Walker replied, +1. Larry Mordecai replied, +1. Alice Chan responded, +1. Valerie Leitenberg, +1. Very soon there was a long string of replies. Dozens of students said they'd be participating in the reunion this year. The group chatted and teased each other good-naturedly. It had been 3 years since they'd graduated, and they'd only had one reunion so far. It was time for another. Lee Taylor directed a message to Heather Cassidy. "Since so many people are interested, can you be in charge of keeping track of everyone who will be attending? I'll be in charge of booking the venue." Heather replied quickly, "LOL, don't worry, Mr. President. I promise to complete the mission." James had been quietly watching the group chat, but he did not participate. He had no interest in these so-called reunions. He knew that they were not occasions to reminisce about the good times they'd all had back in the day. Instead, they were obnoxious showcases for people who were doing well to brag about their accomplishments. They were going to compare titles, salaries, cars, houses, and their children's achievements. It was all about satisfying their egos. James knew the reunion would only be a reenactment of his college years with these people. Many of his classmates were rich kids from the New York metropolitan area with blue blood family backgrounds. He was from a far less advantaged background, far from New York City, so he found it uncomfortable mingling with them. And frankly, all the hypocrisy on display bored him. He did not plan to attend. As he was about to click out of the chat, Gavin Delaney chimed in. "Why is there nothing from James Tucker? I heard he's been working in New York, but that's all I know." James used to have a good relationship with Gavin back in school, but they'd lost contact soon after graduation. It was not especially odd. New York was a big place, and people often drifted away from each other as they pursued separate career paths. Gavin wasn't letting up. He asked everyone in the group if they knew where James was now so he could reach out to him again. Others immediately joined the thread. Jose Rodriguez said, "James used to be in the study group for our economics class." Harry Bates said, "Yeah, I heard he stayed in New York after graduation to work, but there has been no news of him otherwise." Latoya Greenwood said, "James was a handsome guy with a great personality. I bet he's doing well now." Once his former classmates started discussing him, James started paying closer attention to their chat. Katie Williams directly addressed him. "James, I don't know if you can see this, but I sincerely hope you can attend the reunion in 3 days." Katie was considered the class belle, while James was widely regarded as the most handsome boy in the class. A lot of their classmates felt they would make the perfect couple. It was based on a shallow assumption about their looks alone, but still, that was the talk back then. They never did get together and become lovers, though. James started dating Natalie Cooper instead. Katie Williams' WeChat message was unexpected, causing the entire group chat to explode. Everyone started discussing their pairing as if they were still young students. Is Katie trying to make up for her regret back then? Katie, James fell in love with Natalie Cooper. Are you trying to steal him away from her? Can I assume that you are taking the opportunity to confess, Katie? Almost all of the students knew that Katie was still single. The class president, Lee Taylor, had been in love with her for a long time. In fact, he had pursued her relentlessly after graduation, but he was given the cold shoulder. But Lee had never given up on her, and when he saw that everyone in the group was still pairing her up with James Tucker, his mood grew foul. In his anger, he immediately threw out a string of sneering emojis. Then he took a series of digs at James. James Tucker is probably managing a Panera somewhere in Indiana. I doubt he'll come to the reunion. He never had what it takes to make it in New York. I know where he came from. It was all farmers and moonshine and banjo music in the mountains. I can only imagine what he looks like now. Lee's words dripped with sarcasm. He obviously looked down on James and was belittling him deliberately in front of Katie. But nobody came to James's defense. Lee Taylor's family was influential in New York circles. They were old money, comfortable in all the right corridors of culture and power. No one in the group dared to call him out. After all, a big reason for some of them to attend the reunion was to suck up to him. If it wasn't for Lee Taylor's family background, James Tucker would have most certainly been class president. He was a sharp student, an excellent person all around. When no one in the group replied to his ugly attack, Lee addressed Katie directly, being even more blatantly disrespectful to James. Katie, I'm looking forward to seeing you at the reunion. Don't think about Farmer Tucker. This gathering will be way out of his league. Katie apparently could not stand it anymore and replied, We're all classmates, Lee. You should shut your trap. If James doesn't come to the reunion, I don't think I'll attend either. James had been watching all of this drama coldly. Right then and there, he decided he would be going to the reunion. He typed out his first message to everyone in the WeChat group. I'll be at the reunion. Since beautiful Katie Williams thinks so highly of me, then I guess I will have to attend. Waiting a beat to let his sudden appearance sink in, he then reached out to Heather Cassidy. Count me in, Heather. I'll see you all in 3 days. James was not at all interested in the reunion initially, but Lee Taylor's words were too harsh to ignore. He shut off his phone and smiled, already looking forward to giving the pompous prick a slap in the face this time. Episode 33, The System. James Tucker's sudden appearance in the chat group took everyone by surprise, but nobody dared to say anything. It was as if a social bomb had gone off in the group. James clearly intended to butt heads with Lee. Things had suddenly become very interesting. In fact, they wished they had a bag of popcorn to enjoy the show. Katie Williams finally broke the momentary silence. She sent a smiling emoji and greeted James warmly. Wow, James Tucker, you finally appeared. Long time no see. James responded with a smiling emoji. I hope you won't go back on your word. I am looking forward to seeing you again. Next, Heather Cassidy replied to James, welcoming him back after he'd been off the radar for so long. Lee just sent a sneering emoji, after which the online discussion quieted down. The invisible war in the chat group ended, just like that. In James's eyes, however, this was not a war at all. To him, Lee Taylor was an insignificant clown who didn't know any better. James, are you home? I've come back to get something. James shook his head in disgust. It was Natalie. Only then did he realize he hadn't deleted his ex-girlfriend's number. He figured she probably saw him replying to Lee in the group chat just now, which was why she knew he was online. At first, James wanted to block her number without replying, but after giving it a second thought, he decided to respond. "I don't live in that shithole of an apartment anymore. If you want to take anything, go for it. And after how you treated me at the Atlantic Grill, you and I are done." He did not wait for Natalie's reply. He deleted her link, phone number, and all of her contact information on his phone. There was no need to hold on to their past memories. James next turned his attention to the global check-in system. Ever since he'd obtained the system, he had been too busy to carefully study how it worked. Since he had plenty of free time now, he decided to go through its functions. He opened the link and a light blue screen appeared in the void in front of him. It was the main interface of the system. There were 5 sections. Each one had a brief, clear explanation of its meaning. James settled back and read the screen. Current host, James Tucker. Host rank 100. There have been 99 previous hosts. James Tucker is the first host on Earth. Host level. Level 1 of 10 levels. Every progressive level up will reward the host with special skills such as photographic memory, master level investing, martial arts, sailing, piloting, skydiving, and so forth. All kinds of special skills are available. Check-in progress. 4 check-in locations have been completed. Next check-in location, Orion Building. Only 1 check-in location will be announced at a time. When the host has completed the check-in, the next location will be displayed. There is no time limit to complete the check-in. Rewards received. 1 lucky card. 10 floors of the Global Financial Center. 1 Ferrari 812. 10 apartments in the Murray Building, Tribeca, New York City. James finished reading the system's description and shook his head in wonder. He was completely astonished by his amazing turn of events. The total value of the rewards he had received so far was probably close to $5 billion, yet he had only reached level 1. To suddenly have such enormous wealth was more than enough to catapult him onto the Forbes list of the world's 400 richest people. He couldn't imagine what kind of mind-boggling wealth he would have when he reached level 10 someday. He'd be the richest person on the planet. But even that was not what shocked him the most. As he progressed through the levels, he would be rewarded with all these incredible special skills. Looking at the various skills on the screen, James felt as if he would be some sort of superhero once he collected every one of them. Now more familiar with the system, James began to think about the next check-in location at the Orion Building. But he wondered, why there? That was where he used to work. The Prexnus Pharmaceutical Company was on the 5th floor of that building. He realized that his global check-in system somehow had a close connection with his life. More often than not, the system seemed to know exactly how to fulfill his wishes and dreams. James thought about it. He had been constantly humiliated at Prexnus. The check-in system wanted to reward him and help him vent his anger and take revenge. Dude, James thought, if you give me the entire Orion Building as a reward tomorrow, now that will be something. Thinking of this, he couldn't help but grin like a Cheshire cat. James grew more excited as he imagined the scene the next day. James slept the best he'd had in years that night. When he woke up, it was already 9 in the morning. He sat up on the sofa and stretched. He felt an overwhelming sense of comfort not having to go to work at his old job. He looked around the gorgeous apartment. "Open the curtains," he said. With barely a noise, the curtain slid open automatically. James felt like he was in a sci-fi movie. The AI was so advanced in this place. The building's owner, the Silverbell Corporation, never cut corners on its projects. He walked over to the window and took in the scene below him. The morning sun shone on his body, making him feel warm and comfortable. James went into the spacious bathroom to wash up. He had many things to take care of today. Mitchell Haynes had already drafted the lease contract for his first tenant in the Global Financial Center. He would give him a call to sign it. Furthermore, Mitchell was now his employee. He still needed to decide on his salary, where his office would be, and other details. Afterward, he needed to rush to the Orion building to check in. He was eager to see what kind of reward he would receive this time. Only then did he call his good friend Scott to arrange everything for him. James Tucker was a person who did not go back on his word. He would never make false promises to others. Once he said he would do something, he did it. This was his style of doing things. James took his time getting ready in the luxurious bathroom. It was stocked with everything he could possibly need. He finally understood what a rich person's daily life was like. As he finished washing up, his phone buzzed. It was Mitchell. "Mitch," he said cheerfully, "come to the Murray building immediately. You know where it is. Call me when you get there." Mitchell was stunned for a second before responding. "Okay, boss." As a native of New York, Mitchell naturally knew that Tribeca was one of the trendiest, wealthiest neighborhoods in the city. He couldn't believe James was living there now. After hanging up, Mitchell grabbed his stuff and rushed out the door. He figured the subway would take too long, so he hailed a cab. When he arrived at the entrance to the Murray building a half an hour later, James was already waiting there in front of his Ferrari A12. As soon as he stepped out of the cab, Mitchell immediately began apologizing. "Sorry I'm late, James. Traffic was nuts." James waved it off. "You're not late. I just arrived myself." Still, he looked at Mitch, and he was pleased with his conscientious attitude. Without wasting any words, James took the contract from Mitchell and signed it right there on the hood of the Ferrari. Then he handed it back and said, "Listen carefully to every word I'm about to say." Mitchell perked up his ears, intrigued. "You bet." "From today onward," James said, "you will be my personal property manager. Your annual salary will be $5 million. All bonuses and other incentives will depend on your performance. I'll transfer $2 million to you today. $1 million of that will be to cover the company's initial expenses. Use it to get an office, car, and everything else we'll need to get up and running. Consider the other $1 million in advance on your salary. Other than the 60th floor, I want you to rent out the other 9 floors I own in Global Financial Center at market price. The top floor will be kept as our headquarters. I plan to acquire other properties in New York later. I'll hand them over to you to help me manage them. The renovation of the headquarters will also be your responsibility. I will initiate that as soon as I have enough funds. The current office location is not fixed, so you can decide for yourself. We can always find another location for our headquarters. When there's nothing important going on, you can do whatever you want. You don't have to ask for leave from me. Do you understand?" James had outlined the broad strokes of his ambitious plans without taking a breath. He looked at Mitchell for his response. Mitchell answered automatically when he saw James waiting for his response, but his mind was completely blank. Okay, James. I hear you loud and clear." It wasn't that his new boss had spoken too quickly or said too much. It was because Mitchell was thoroughly shocked by James Tucker's incredible words. Episode 34, A Special Reward. When James said that he wanted to pay him $5 million a year, Mitchell's mind was already a jumbled mess. He hadn't heard a single word after that. His mind had gone blank. "Are you sure you heard everything clearly?" Looking at his dazed new employee, James suspected his thoughts were somewhere else. Mitchell contained his excitement and nodded solemnly. "Yes, I heard it clearly and remember everything. I am looking forward to getting started." James did not want to question Mitchell too much. He just nodded and waved his hand. "If you say so, I've transferred the $2 million to your account. It's enough for now, right?" James was not a suspicious person. Although his father was only a simple farmer, he had taught his son a lot of principles while growing up. For one, James understood the principle of not working with someone if he doubted that person in any way. Since he had chosen to let Mitchell work for him, he would not doubt his ability or loyalty. "Yes, sir," Mitchell replied. Mitchell turned around and walked up the street. Unbeknownst to James, he was covered in cold sweat. To be honest, he did not remember James's instructions at all, but his phone did. From the beginning of his professional life, Mitchell liked to use his phone to record his boss's instructions. It was faster and a lot more convenient than taking notes by hand, where he always was worried whether he'd be able to keep up without missing some important information. Later, he would replay the recording and sort out his notes. Any normal observer would consider Mitchell's work ethic to be conscientious and positive. He was a hard-working guy who would be an asset to any employer. However, this habit of his was mocked by many of his colleagues at Larry Miller Real Estate. Who would have thought it would have come in handy today? In a sense, it was this habit that had helped him win a super high salary, making him wonder if it was all still a dream. At the Orion building, James looked at the office workers hustling in and out of the entrance. He couldn't help but reminisce. A few days ago, he was an ordinary office worker himself, who was busy trying to earn a living like everyone else. At his old salary, he would have had to stop eating, drinking, sleeping, and work nonstop for 50 years before he could own a home in New York City. But he was no longer an ordinary office worker. James chuckled and then strode toward the front door of the Orion building. I wonder what kind of reward my check-in will give me today, he thought. The location of the check-in was on the ground floor lobby of the building. James only needed to walk through the door. He eagerly waited for the wonderful notification from the system to ring in his mind. Ding! Congratulations to the host for checking in. You have obtained the reward, the ownership rights of the entire Orion building. Sure enough, James had just walked in the main door and gone less than 10 steps when the system notification sounded in his mind. He laughed and muttered to himself, This is exactly what I wanted. The whole Orion building. Damn, this reward is too good. Although the building's location was not as good as the global financial centers, and its value was far less, it was still 32 floors tall. James did a quick calculation in his head. The total value would be no less than $1 billion. If it were a few days ago, James would have been struck dumb. But because his check-in rewards were all so incredibly lucrative, he was already somewhat numb to everything that was happening to him. Despite having just received the keys to an entire building, he only smiled faintly. He was no longer as excited as when he'd gotten the first check-in reward. It seemed like he was developing an immunity to money. The relevant information regarding the building will be delivered within 10 minutes. Host, please do not leave the check-in location. Pay attention to the express delivery. The system notification continued in his mind. The next check-in location is Perkins Pier. Pier? Although he was intrigued, he still had to wait for the express delivery. Besides, he was in no hurry. He found a place to sit down and thought about the next check-in location. A pier? What in the world will the reward be this time? Then a new message entered his mind. Congratulations, host. You have completed 5 check-ins. You are now at level 2. You will get 2 draws for the system's special skills. Do you wish to draw now? Only then did James snap back to his senses. Now he realized how the system worked. The increase in level was not determined by the host's measure of wealth, but by the number of check-ins completed. Do you wish to draw now? When James didn't answer, the system prompted him a third time. Do you wish to draw now? This time he did not hesitate. He was ready. He would be a fool to not draw right away. What if there was a time limit? It would be a huge loss if he missed out on this. James was very interested in these special skills. With them, who knew how powerful he could become? He expressed his consent. The draw is in progress. A wheel appeared on the main interface of the system, like the giant one on the TV game show Wheel of Fortune. On it was listed all kinds of special skills separated into different sections. The wheel started spinning. James guessed that wherever the pointer stopped, he would obtain the corresponding skill. The spin lasted for about 10 seconds, but before James could see what he won, the wheel started spinning again. When it stopped this time, the wonderful sound of the system echoed in his mind. Congratulations to the host for obtaining a special memory skill. Photographic memory. Congratulations to the host for obtaining a special transportation skill, ship sailing. The skills are currently being distributed. Please accept them. James suddenly felt his brain swell. An instant later, he felt especially sensitive to numbers. Just as suddenly, a mountain of knowledge regarding sailing ships and cruise ships appeared in his mind. The system notification sounded again, giving out the related special items with the acquired skills. Ding! Congratulations to the user for obtaining a special item. Cruise Piloting License A1F. The item has been stored in the special item storage space for you. As soon as the system's voice faded, James instantly saw another section of the bottom of the main interface. It was the special storage space. Using just his thoughts, he quickly opened it and saw that there was indeed an icon inside. It looked like a license of some sort. He pointed directly at it in his mind. The icon became bigger and a string of words appeared below, asking if he wanted to extract it. James clicked on yes. There was a flash of light. A license appeared in his hand out of nowhere. This system is amazing. James looked at the license, his eyes filled with shock. Even though he was becoming used to the global check-in system, he was still astounded by what it could do. He quickly read the words on the license. As promised, it was a cruise piloting license A1F. Although James didn't know much about the different degrees of boating licenses, looking at this one, he felt that it wouldn't be too disappointing. After all, when did the system ever give out cheap things? But then he realized something. Wait a minute, if I already have so much knowledge about piloting a ship, how come I don't know the level of this license? He focused his mind, and the various levels of qualification immediately appeared in his thoughts. A ship's piloting qualification was divided into 3 levels. They were A2E, A2F, and A1F. A1F was the highest of the 3. A person with an A1F pilot's license could navigate boats, cruise ships, and ships of various lengths at sea. This is amazing, he thought. He was rewarded with such a powerful skill. It was awesome. Without hesitation, James put the pilot's license back into the special storage space. It was actually kind of simple. All he had to do was think about it, and the license in his hand was automatically taken back. James sorted out his emotions and planned to call Scott. He wanted to ask him to help manage the Orion building. After all, James was the one who had made Scott quit his job yesterday. He had every intention to take care of his friend, but how would he explain everything to him? It was too incredible to believe. James frowned. He raised his head and glanced at the management details of the Orion building. There were at least 1,000 words on the page, but he found he had memorized the entire content with just a casual glance. This has to be due to my new photographic memory, James said. This is amazing. It's like I can memorize information in a second. The more he thought about it, the more excited he became. He was becoming worried that he might not be able to keep track of his rewards in the future, especially when one day those rewards would spread all over the world. But now that he had such a fantastic memory, he didn't need to worry. James smiled. He was extremely satisfied with the special skills he'd received. Without wasting any more time, he took out his phone and called Scott. He assumed that the package containing the property rights for the Orion building would arrive soon. As soon as the call connected, James didn't waste any time. Scott, come to the lobby of the Orion building immediately. I'll wait for you here. Scott was surprised by James' sudden call. The Orion building? Why? Don't tell me you want to set up a company there. To be honest, Scott did not want to go there. Prexnus Pharmaceutical was located there, and he had just resigned yesterday. It would be embarrassing if he ran into his former bosses in the building. Although Scott seemed otherwise, he was actually a shy person who did not like confrontation. Don't ask so many questions. Get over here. Believe me, you're going to be thrilled when you hear what I have to say. James hung up right after he finished speaking. He had seen a courier come in the lobby from the main entrance.